Today we're replacing the chain and sprockets on this Honda Shadow 750. Let's get to it.
Might be acting up again. Save my day, my best friend.
I've already got ahead of myself, but pulled the sprocket cover off. Once we have that off, we're going to pull the sprocket retainer off. It's two 10mm headed bolts. I'm going to wiggle that little keeper off, the retainer off. Sometimes they can be stuck. Once I got that front sprocket all ready to come apart, I'm going to go ahead and remove the rear axle. In this instance, I'm using an impact on the left side and a wrench on the right side to hold the nut. Once that's off, I'm going to disconnect the rear brake rod. And then we need to remove the drum brake hub mounting bolt, which is kind of hidden underneath the exhaust in this shot. Once you have that all removed, you can go ahead and pull the axle out. Once the axle's out, that wheel's going to fall down. We're going to start pulling the spacers out of the left side here, remove that chain. Come over to the brake side, we're going to remove the entire brake assembly. Now we're going to jack that bike the rest of the way up so we can get the wheel out. With that wheel all the way off, we're going to go ahead and impact these sprocket retaining nuts off. There are 5 in total on this head. Going to grab that new sprocket and unpackage it. I always like to verify the pattern fits and that the sprocket is in fact the same as the previous sprocket if you're using the same size. After verifying that sprocket, we're going to go ahead and mount this to the hub. With the nuts all started by hand, I'm going to zip them on real quick with my impact. Once those are all lightly tightened, we will torque these to spec with the torque wrench. Honda calls for 47 foot-pounds. We're going to torque these all up. With the rear sprocket fully mounted, we're going to go ahead and reinstall the rear wheel. Pretty much the opposite order of how we uninstalled it, starting with the brake drum assembly. I'm going to bring the the rear end of the bike down to help me get this all to line up. Anytime you're using this style of jack with a motorcycle, you want to be very careful on slowly lowering the bike down. If you go too fast, you'll drop the fender on the wheel and damage the bike. Now that we got that axle hole lined up a little bit closer, we're going to start sliding in spacers and putting the axle through, put the chain on, and get this wheel installed. Sometimes with reinstalling these axles, you do have to do a little bit of wiggling and finagling to make these things work. Raise or lower the jack if that helps. Just make sure you get everything put back together in the right order. The spacers go where they're supposed to. Otherwise, you'll be starting all over. Right here is going to be one of these do as I say, not as I do moments. I'm going to put the washer and the nut on the axle at this time, just to keep everything together. Not that the axle's going anywhere, but you need to be very mindful in doing this because I have to install the chain and tension the chain and then re-tighten all of this when it's done. And I don't recommend loosely installing things because that's a very good way to forget to tighten something when you're all done. I'm going to go ahead and install all the brake components now, which those I can secure all the way. But that axle nut, it's probably smarter to leave off till the job's done. Secure it all at the end. I do remember to tighten it at the end, so it's not a big deal, but some of those things can get you in trouble. Alright, we've got that wheel loosely installed. Now it's time to get rid of the old chain. I like to personally grind the rivets on one of the plates. If you don't have a master link, you can see we got it all ground smooth. Then I'll take an air hammer and I will chisel that front plate off. Since there's no pins holding that plate on anymore, it usually will pop right off. And it's loose, and just for fun I'll shoot the other side off. With the chain broken, it's now time to come up to the front here. We need to get the sprocket off. On this particular motorcycle, there is a chain guard that protects the case. That chain guard does need to come off for the sprocket to slide off. Then I'm going to back this chain off the front sprocket. Now that I almost have that front sprocket removed, I also have to remove the shifter. I like to make a small mark just so I know how to line that back up on assembly. Out with the old and in with the new. I verified that these sprockets match just like the rear, and we're going to assemble this. Earlier I didn't fully remove the chain, I only backed it off a little bit, and this is the reason why. I like to be able to put the chain back on the front sprocket, pull it through, and I will connect the new chain to the old chain and pull the whole thing through as one long assembly. unwrapping the new chain here. I'm going to go ahead and take the old link that we cut, connect the two chains together, and this is the part, like I said, where I like to pull it all through. Makes it a little simpler, a little cleaner way to do this. You're not getting that new chain grease all over your fingers. Once I have that chain through, I like to make sure that I have the axle and wheel slid forward, usually as far as possible. That way I know that I get the chain on as far as I can. This chain is oversized, meaning I have to cut it down. It's not an exact fit. So I like to scoot everything forward just to make sure that I've got the chain on as tight as possible before I go to tension it. And it looks like this one is going to line up great, which tells me I can go ahead and grind off this plate. I'll go ahead and pull the tensioners back a little bit just to make sure that they're right within spec, right where I want them, and this chain looks like it's good. Next, we're going to grind this plate off just like we did with the old one, being very careful not to nick any other parts of the chain. Again, just like before, we're going to use my air hammer to get that front plate off, this time being much more delicate. We do not want to damage any components of this chain, resulting in having to buy another one. So we're going to gently tap and get this front plate off. Once it starts loosening up, I'll put it back on the sprocket for a little bit of support and hammer on the back side of the link, which will pop that whole assembly apart. Next comes installing the new master link. I'll unwrap it. This is an O-ring type chain, and I like the plates to all face the same direction. That way the letters are upside right compared to the rest of the chain. I'm going to slide in the master link with the O-rings already installed on the back side. I'll come through the front side. We'll get our new O-rings put on the front side, and then it'll be time to press the plate onto the link. This is a rivet type link, which is what I recommend you put on any kind of motorcycle, unless it's a dirt bike. That might be the exception. But press type links don't come apart if you install them correctly. Where the clip types, I have seen them pop off even when they're installed properly. It happens. Only downside with a press type link is that it does require a chain tool. This one happens to be a Motion Pro chain tool, so what I'm doing right now is I'm pressing the front plate onto the link. Once it's pressed on and the same width as the rest of the links, we'll swap over to the rivet press or expander. Basically, it's going to mushroom out the end of those rivets so that plate can never come off again. This is kind of a feel thing. You want to go far enough or tight enough that you mushroom it out, but if you go too far, you can crack the rivets and you have to start all over with new parts. So here I'm going to squish it down pretty good, and we do this to both of the rivets. For an extra safety measure, I was taught by one of my old school mentors to take a hammer and just peen over the end of those rivets a little bit further, just to make sure that they're expanded out enough and you'll never have another issue with that plate coming off. Here I'm going to go ahead and start to tension this chain up a little bit. Once I have that chain tension where I like it, we go to the other side and make sure our marks are all lined up. Make sure that the axle is in line with the bike so we don't have any weird wear on the wheel or tire. I'm going to spin that tire, double checking that we have consistent chain tension all the way around, that nothing is wrong. When I'm happy with that, we're going to button this bike back up, putting the sprocket cover back on the front. Off camera, I tightened up that axle, and we're good to go.
Might be acting up again. Save my day, my best friend. To get it fixed over. Stoversmotors.